I'm very excited to welcome Ninel, who is the head of the project Devoted Speakeasy, and they were preparing an interview with Dociu, one of the creators of Guild Wars back in the years. Hi, Ninel.
Hi, pleasure
How are
meeting
you?
you. Good, good. Very excited to share what we spoke about with Daniel last week, and I'm really happy to share his story and be a host because I'm just asking questions and just telling other people's stories.
Yes, same here. I'm also here to ask some questions, and that's what I'm planning to do with you right now for a few minutes. Could
Sure.
you tell us more about your initiative and Devoted Speakeasy and your plans for the further interviews?
Oh, wow. That's a big question. I mean, it can take hours to just respond. I mean, hi, my name is Ninel Anderson. My day job, I'm a CEO of Devoted Studios, which is a hub for external development. And I recently started Devoted Speakeasy, which is a podcast for as an inspiration and a practical guide to grow as a professional in the gaming industry. I moved to States 4 years ago, and I feel like that was a very fortunate moment for me because I was able to finally tap in heads of a lot of different people who became my friends and come and ask questions that I've been having for years of how can I be better or how can I grow instead of inventing a wheel every time I have a problem in front of me. Um, Before that, it was more of a harder thing when I was living in Eastern Europe, and I feel that if we all come together and share our stories and share our experiences and support each other's growth, we can be much better in the industry as an industry in general, and we can be much better as professionals, and we can deliver much better products for our industry, because I truly believe that game development is just the best industry in the world. It's just a perfect mix of creativity and tech. So you got to be very creative and you got to be very smart, and that delivers the best games. It's like pretty much like if Hollywood and Silicon Valley would have a baby, that would be game development industry.
Yes, I totally agree. And so many talented people with like such the different fields of expertise can meet here in games industry.
Yeah. Well, that's about it. Well, I hope the story that we're going to be sharing with Danielle, that you guys going to listen and view in a little bit, would help a lot of people in understanding how to be a better art director, how to develop IP, how to use techniques, how to develop a visual language, how to lead a team as a conductor and inspire people around you. So I hope it's going to be interesting.
Me too. So let's get to it and let's watch it. Thank you very much for this quick intro, Ninel.
Thank you. Thanks for asking me. Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Ninel Anderson, and I'm CEO of Devoted Studios and your host at Devoted Speakeasy. Tonight, I have a great guest, Dociu, with me. Daniel, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for inviting me. My pleasure.
Thank you. Well, Daniel, for me, you are a father of Guild Wars. And for somebody that built such a renowned franchise, can you tell me who is the creative driver of the game, especially like big titles, right? What is the ratio of like art, design, maybe level design, maybe engineering, the creative, like where's the creativity coming from?
Well, ideally from everybody, as long as everybody comes to the table with an open mind. And I've been historically accused a lot of times of trying to kind of drive creatively or take the initiative and be the driving force. It was 100% by necessity. It was only when I ran into situations where design couldn't get their ducks in a row, or technology was falling behind, or where there was indecisiveness, and I had a large team to keep busy. I've literally been part of a development process where literally on day one, I was told art production starts today. We have no idea what the game is going to be about. We know that it's loosely based in this universe, but we have zero concept of what kind of game mechanics or single player, multiplayer, cooperative. We don't know, but you need to start production today, because back then our art staff was 127 artists sitting on their hands. So what do you do in those situations? It is what it is.
So what do you do?
What do you do? You start, and my approach was start with assets that are not story dependent. So everything that is story agnostic, like, are we going to need vegetation? Hell yeah. Bushes, trees, rocks, ground cover, water tech. And then, are we going to need ambient creatures? Most likely birds, stuff. So gradually you kind of start with the low-hanging fruit and kind of move on and move on. But if design and everybody else still lags behind, before long you'll need to tackle stuff that whether you want it or not will dictate the direction of the game, because you start building architecture and you start building maps and visual targets and stuff like that. So because of that, we got very far along with the art by necessity, and it was seen as us trying to take over the world, which wasn't at all the case. So
you saved it. I'm actually very interested, and I want to dive a little deeper, because I think that's where a lot of companies actually find themselves, because there is our team and the design team is still creating, or iterating on the idea, and you don't want to be building the game with the half-baked idea, right? So maybe they need a little more time. So I get the part with environments and things that are not on the critical part, but like for this particular project, for example, did you have at least the style defined? Did you have like the look of the characters, or like what was your starting point? And aside of the enviornments, what did you
are opening a whole bunch of can of worms. I could elaborate on all these aspects for forever. Like, again, I'm going back to the concept of building the roller coaster as you go. Having the style defined up front is something I never was an adept of. I never was a proponent of defining style very strictly up front. In my opinion, style should be an organic consequence of including all the creatives and assimilating all their contributions into the product. So in my opinion, if you have a team of 127 and one person leaves and is replaced by somebody else, the product should be slightly different. Very much like in an orchestra, if you have one person on the flute and then gets replaced by somebody else, if you truly want to tap into the talent of that person and the sensibility of that person, you let them bring their own touch to that instrument. And the end result will be infinitesimally different, yet different nonetheless. So I think that now, even more than I was young, I have learned to let go. And I do believe very strongly in allowing the artists on my team the creative freedom that they deserve, and that also contributes immensely to the complexity and the richness of a title. There is one mentor, so to speak, that I keep referring to over and over, and I've mentioned his name many times during lectures or to my students or coworkers, and it's an Israeli conductor, Itai Talgam. You can find him on YouTube, look up his TED Talk. And he has a couple of talks. One of them is called Leading Like a Conductor, and one of them is called The Art of the Rehearsal. And he uses conducting an orchestra as a metaphor to leadership. And I find it extremely pertinent to the various styles of leading creative people. And he illustrates all these styles with footage from famous conductors throughout history, conducting really successful orchestras, and from the very kind of strict and hands-on and dictatorial style of conducting all the way to completely hands-free. And basically he covers the whole spectrum with examples, and allows the viewer to basically figure out where they'd fit and what resonates with them. And as far as I'm concerned, I fully embrace the very, very liberal, very hands-off way or style of leading creatives. And early on, when I first started ArenaNet, I had, the founders looking over my shoulder and people around, around the table and kind of, what do you think? And that is okay. I've paid my dues, years of, not years, but, over a period of doing that. I said, hey, you're not really contributing. Put words on it or trust me. And over time, I built that trust. And I also empowered the artists on my team, with the same kind of, creative freedom. So they don't feel like I'm looking over their shoulders and be paralyzed, with fear every micro decision they make, whether they're going to do it right or they're get their wrists slapped.
Well, speaking about building a team, how many artists were there when you just joined ArenaNet? Like, who were you?
I think I was employee number 21 and about 6 artists. I think I was number 6.
What was the state of art back then on the project, and how far it is from? I mean, I bet it is.
I mean, don't want to make it sound like it was all my merit or whatever, but it was in a pretty bad, horrible shape. Horrible. But that being said, it wasn't necessarily by their fault. It was intended as a technical demo, or that's what impressed NCSoft when they bought them. It was for its its technical
Mhm.
capabilities, not for the art. They weren't even planning on having an art director until NCSoft basically raised the flag and said, "Hey, it's you know, the code is smart, the idea is solid, whatever, but it's not holding up artistically." And that's they kind of forced the founders to reconsider on their decision to do it, wing it themselves.
And what were the first things you did on the project?
Literally, the first things I did was, before I even got the job, you know, the president of the company told me, "Hey, here are some screenshots. Take them home over the weekend,"
Mm-hmm.
because they couldn't quite understand what it is I can contribute. And again, it was about, you know, how better looks like,
Yeah.
you know. So
And points, zeros and ones.
yeah. So I took those screenshots home and did paint overs and went back on Monday, and they said, "Okay, I get it." And it was really awesome because they were, you know, received with a great deal of excitement, not just by the, you know, founders but also by the engineers. They had brilliant graphics engineers, and they just didn't know what the artist wanted out of their engine. And they saw,
Mm-hmm.
you know, the lighting proposals, and they saw the, you know, whatever, fog and all kind of cheap tricks of the trade, and say, "God, this makes all the difference, and we know how to do this," or "This is something."
Yeah.
They really responded well to these visual stimuli, and, you know, took it as a personal challenge to build these features into the engine. And people always, or oftentimes, perceive art and engineering to be at odds, and that was one awesome thing about ArenaNet. They were never at odds, and it was
I love
always
that.
this kind of challenging. I mean, they would absolutely raise to any challenges, and the more difficult, the more pride they took in solving it, to the point where, you know, by the end, we knew how to work the system, and we'd have, for instance, we'd have to officially submit any request for features to production, and they would put it on the list. And you know, the deeper you get into the development cycle, obviously all the new features go at the bottom, right? But oftentimes they were really kind of juicy features we wanted. And so we just, by the water cooler, find an opportunity and just say, "I wish this would be I wish this was possible," and trying to, like, thinking out loud, knowing that, you know, the engineer who's an expert on this is kind of eavesdropping, and leave it at that. And then 2 days later, they'd come and, "Hey, I want to show you something. Come over." And it's like, "Hey, this is what I did on my own time." It was actually pretty easy. Just, you know, a few knobs here and there, a line of code here and there. But, you know, had we gone through the official channels, it would have never made it. So we kind of got kind of crafty and manipulative, but it was always for the, you know, the benefit of the game, at kind of working the system and getting our wish list taken care of.
So how did you, I mean, it seems like the culture was very loving and caring for each other. How
Oh,
did you?
I mean, to this day, if you'll ask 99% of the artists who've ever worked there, they refer to it as the best place for an artist, for a creative, the best place they ever worked for, and kind of think of it kind of lovingly as their school or their formative years. And we've had some incredible talent that I hired straight out of school, who are now like industry giants. And You know, they were there for a few years until literally they didn't have more room for their giant wingspan. And hey, by all means, it's time for you to take off and move on to movies or whatever you want to do. And that's perfectly fine. But looking back to this day, they think of it as this big, happy art family. And it's fantastic. And we get together every now and again and kind of reminisce of the good old times, and they call me literally, you know, 3-4 times a week for advice from all over the place, all over the industry. And hey, you know, I'm facing this career decision. What would you do and stuff. So
yeah, I love that about ArenaNet team, because we have quite a few mutual friends, and anytime I talk to any of you guys, it's always like, hey, you know, I talked to Daniel last week, I talked to Max, it's very empowering for me to see how connected you are. So how did you build that culture from 6 artists? How many artists did you have at peak? 120?
127 was at the largest number while I was there.
127. So how did you build from 6 to, I don't know, 30, from 30 to 70, from 70 to 100? Like, can you tell me the process while keeping the culture loving?
Yeah, well, you know, the size of the team was driven by necessity and by the, you know, the scope of the project and the fact that we diversified or branched into expansions and whatever. So, but as far as the talent itself, I was early on very, very involved with recruiting the talent. And probably up to the point where we got to, you know, 70, 80 people, I would make sure to. And by then, the discipline leads, the art discipline leads, were seasoned enough to where they, by now, could basically think like me and understand the culture and approve of that culture, to where, you know, they were kind of promoting the same tenets and hiring the talent accordingly. But, you know, you don't know to what extent it's a good idea to mention names, but, you know, for instance, like this hugely successful and famous concept artist, he got rejected 3 times, you know, was straight out of school and got rejected 3 times because his tone of voice is this really deep tone of voice, and he's very short and you know, he's not very smart, very well-rounded, well-read, articulate, but very kind of comes across as short and abrupt in his communication. He's a, you know, heart of gold and sweetest guy, but he got rejected over and over. And I said, no, we need this guy. And Pat Wyatt, to this day, says, you know, I could never understand early on what you saw in this guy, but looking back, you were so right. And how did you do it? Well, I know what to look for, very much like you know what to look for in hiring engineers.
So what did you look for?
Well, raw talent, passion, work ethics, the drive, the grit. For 6 months, did nothing but dirt textures, like 64 by 64 tiles of dirt. The most brutal, you know, work until, and it broke my heart, but that's what was needed. And one day he came to me and said, I literally can't do this anymore. He said, I quote, to this day, he said, it fragments my mind. I can't think straight anymore. And I said, okay, enough. You're being promoted. No more textures for you. Moving people around and putting people in the right positions and matching the assignments to the strengths of the people on the team rather than trying to shoehorn them into whatever needs to be done.
So it seems like art director needs to be constantly present to his
Oh,
team, moods, vibes, passions.
Personally, I was out and walking around and looking over people's shoulders all day long. And, you know, I mean, I would go in super early at 6 a.m. every morning to get some actual artwork done. But so by the time, you know, the people would come in at 9 or 9:30, I've done the painting part out of the way. I got it out of the way and would then switch to kind of moving around the company and looking over people's shoulders.
I've actually watched a couple interviews where the artists were like, yeah, Daniel would be, you know, up behind my shoulder looking at the artwork. How do you balance that with them not feeling like micromanaged or you like telling them what to do? How do you show up behind their shoulders so they feel loved and they feel empowered? Because I know that empowerment of artists is a very big thing for you.
Sure. Early on, they're all petrified, completely petrified. I mean, paralyzed. Their hands would shake and they'd be, you know. But then as soon as you start giving feedback, it's important that they understand, they realize it's not subjective. It's not, I would never say, do it this way because I said so, or do it this way because that's how I like it, or change this color because I hate green, or whatever. It was, hey, I see what you're doing, but you know, this is what we're trying to accomplish. Would you consider these changes? And do you see how by changing this, you know, the outcome would be better? And if you do this 3 or 4 times and consistently leave them with this feeling of having learned a valuable lesson and that your contribution actually brought the quality of their work up, they start craving it and they want more rather than less. So they welcome it and they signal me, hey, come over. What do you think of this? It's great, it's fantastic, but it just gives me an idea. What if you were to do this to it? And they're like, what are you talking? Well, let's just try.
I think still the team is the biggest question for me. Like, how do you build the team? How do you build leads around you so they communicate your vision, or maybe they transform it in their vision? Like, how does that work from a team of 6 to a team of 120 and ensures consistency yet 100% inclusion? There's so many different pieces. I'm trying to like wrap my head around all of that to make that work.
Well, to begin with, we didn't have leads. I mean, for the longest time, probably a good 4 or 5 years, we didn't have discipline leads at all. It was a completely flat structure. But over 5, 6 years or so, a few people emerged as the ones who you know had the maturity and the drive and the you know the interest in being leaders.
How do you make everyone on the team speak visually guild wars?
It happened over time. It happened over time, and it was through this nudging, constant nudging. It's like, you know, again, you kind of define the general sensibility, but not necessarily resort to dictating a visual language. Just the general sensibility, and then as they start making things, kind of corral them and nudge them in this acceptable range. But that being said, it's an excellent point. To me, that range, that corridor is rather wide. I don't like to spec a style very strictly. I think that a lot of eclecticism is not only allowed, but desirable. It gives the product credibility and color and texture. And the aberrations from the established visual language, it's what give it juiciness. I don't believe in visual language for the sake of language. Language is a means to communicating ideas or content or a message. Language without a message is pointless.
In one of the interviews, when talking about style of Guild Wars and how you land and stylistically on it, you mentioned that when you go very stylistic, you narrow the audience that you can hit. Well, when going very photorealistic, you're broadening the people that it could appeal. And then it's sort of like a mission to find that borderline where you can still communicate being different visually, but still appeal to a wider range of players. How did you land there?
First, a small correction. I don't think I said that going photorealistic broadens the appeal and leave it at that. I said it broadens the appeal, yet it negates its visual identity. So it comes at a cost. That broad, I don't even call it appeal, broad acceptance. There's a difference between acceptable and appealing. So photorealism buys you broad acceptance. Nobody can argue with reality as we know it. It is what it is. But that doesn't buy you the visual differentiation, the identity you want to stand out in a crowded market. So it's a matter of using common sense and testing and kind of narrowing it down and figuring out over time, a sweet spot. You don't decide it spot on from day one. This is another thing I've witnessed and with other teams where part of the pre-production or part of the art Bible was literally the spectrum with game A at one end and game B at the other end.
I've seen that.
And this is where we are at 63% towards B up front. That is bullshit. That's like the 8 on the bacon scale. But just completely arbitrary, arbitrary stylistic positioning. You know that if you go with point B, your audience is going to be extremely narrow, a handful of art aficionados, but probably not the commercial success. You know that if you go with point A, you're going to get lost in a crowded market. And you decide, hey, let me start closer to this or closer to that, but still with a range and fine tune that over time. Going back to one of your previous questions, as far as how do you find that sweet spot between, extreme stylization and the photorealism. One thing you need to keep in mind is your style needs to have a reasonable learning curve. If your style is so particular that it takes forever for the people on the team to assimilate and learn and master, it becomes more of a hindrance than an asset. And I've seen projects like that are directed by absolutely brilliant artists, but who are so specific about every single minute detail of their style that it was practically impossible to scale. I mean, he managed after 2 years to teach literally a handful of his artists to stay true to his to his vision, but then adding new people and growing the team was next to impossible. And eventually the game got canned because the style wasn't scalable and wasn't teachable. Was incredible.
I've been there. I've seen it not only once. And I feel like I wish art directors would see that, that it takes quite a bit of time and be more forgiving and be more supportive sometimes when it's hard to hit the style from the first hit. There and accounting for ramp up time and maybe building the processes or the flows that would allow an artist at least through a certain time to get to that space, thinking through that.
Yeah, forgiving is a good word for it. And I don't mean it, and neither do you, mean it in a derogatory way where letting go of mistakes or lowering your quality standards, but rather widening that corridor, the acceptable corridor, and allowing for aberrations from the prescribed style, and so that's again one thing where I feel differently from a lot of art directors who think of their job as being, as policing consistency. To me, consistency pushed too far leads to monotony and is more detrimental to the credibility of the product. If people would say, well, what would a gun that belongs to this race look like, or what would a piece of clothing that belongs to this tribe look like? They have to look like this. Well, if you look around, there's no common visual language between two objects that are both belong to the same race and the same level of technology and the same period in time. And a bicycle looks completely different from an iPhone, yet they were all the product of the same civilization and race, and that's what gives a universe or a world credibility, plausibility. The fact that you allow some eclecticism built into it. So forgiving is another word for it. Not obsessed with purity of language.
I never thought about it, from the way the comparison that you just made of iPhone and bicycle and trying to fit something within, certain box. Because the world is so different.
You see many sci-fi movies where everything, looks the product of the same designer. The bevels on the interior of the spaceships, the structures, the beams, the whatever, and then whatever, the console where they drive the ship, and the weapons, they all have the same angles, the same belt. That's monotonous and redundant. I mean, what's wrong with still having a yellow number 2 pencil with an eraser on one of those desks? No, they'll make it into this, futuristic prop.
I understand.
So it just erodes the credibility of that environment.
So how do you build? I know that one of the strong things for you is IP development. So how do you build and establish this diversity while consistency from the very beginning on the project? Or how would you recommend somebody who's just starting building an IP?
I've just recently been involved with a couple of early IP development efforts, and I can't show them yet, but if you were to look at them, you see that I'm pushing the eclecticisms. If anything, I'm diversifying too much to where they might look at it and say, can we narrow it down? And because, we need to differentiate, this particular race from that particular race, or the inhabitants of this planet from that, but with everything I do, I push it way beyond, the acceptable, and then back it off a notch, rather than inching towards where that boundary is, because then you never know where that boundary is if you push in small increments. I'm always going for kind of shock factor and going way past that boundary, and then negotiating the kind of that line by backing.
So going broader, like pushing it and then narrowing it down.
Wilder or crazier or bigger or anything, always go to 11 and or more, and then back it off if it shocks. But it's at least very effective as a conversation starter. I'd rather have that shock and the ensuing confrontation or conflict or debate early on, rather than inching towards it and everybody looking at it and it's kind of cool, but can you give me more? Can you give me more options? Let's try more. It's not quite there yet. No, here is something that will scare the bejesus out of you. Then we'll tone it down. We'll negotiate that retreat to an acceptable.
It feels for me that approach gives the possibility to artists that's going to be working on the projects after you establish the IP a freedom of not to be afraid to push certain things.
100%. Yep, that's part of it.
It's all about empowerment. It's all about making artists, allowing them to be creative and allowing them to be talented and not being afraid. And I'm very grateful for you doing that for them.
Keeping them engaged. They need to have something to look forward to coming to work every morning for 7 years, right? If they know that they'll only yet another day at the factory, I'll be, executing on this blueprint, good Lord, you don't want to force them into that mindset.
So what about techniques? We talked about style.
Again, technique also needs to be serving a desired outcome. Technique in itself is pointless unless you know what it is you're trying to the emotional response you want to trigger in your consumer. So what people ask me, what's your favorite brush? What brushes do you use? Where are your, do you make your custom brushes available? First, I don't use any custom brushes. I use the first brush in the Photoshop brush kit. That's all I ever use. Well, why not? Well, because it's good enough for me. To me, it's not about the brush you use, but where you want to get with. And on the other hand, I've worked with, say, Jamie Jones, a freak of nature, one of the greatest concept artists and digital painters of the day. As a kid already, I don't think he was even 20 when I hired him. And he had hundreds of custom brushes and constantly making custom brushes. But he knew what he wanted. His work was all about making one custom brush that will allow him to put one stroke, and that was it, and perfectly accomplished the purpose of it. So it was greatly or very sophisticated and perfected technique, but in the service of the content, of the idea, of the outcome. And he would give away his brushes freely. And everybody was like, why don't you sell these, make packages and, you know, put them online and sell them? And he's like, it's dishonest. I mean, do you think that, you know, if they had those brushes, they, you know, it would serve them? What? Would they paint like me if they had those brushes? No. So, you know, just having Jamie Jones's brushes doesn't bring you 1 inch closer to being Jamie Jones. So he dismissed that as dishonest.
I like that.
It's like, you know, so he's like, no, let them have them for free. Anybody who wants to download my brushes, by all means, and then you'll see what, you know, you make the most out of them. So that's my, so there, I don't dismiss or marginalize the importance of technique. I just emphasize the fact that it needs to serve content and serve a desired outcome.
Is there a difference? I mean, I bet there is. But what do you feel is the different approach to art direction for the projects like Guild Wars and some other titles like you work with on, like, I don't know, James Bond or FIFA or Top Gun or things like that are either there is an existing movie IP or it is very photorealistic, like, you know, soccer games and stuff like that. So what's the different methodology or approach of how to work with properties like that?
Yeah, I mean, they're vastly different. You know, obviously on an IP like Guild Wars, there were no givens. There were no pre-existent you know, restrictions, do's and don'ts, or it was a creative free for all, or paradise, if you want, Ron. In the case of a sports games, obviously you are constrained by, you know, reality, but there's still room to, you know, to put your fingerprint on it. I have not those games you mentioned, like Bond and FIFA. I worked remotely as a, you know, look and feel consultant, not as the franchise AD. So they all had art directors in place who were kind of policing the consistency of assets that come from various external sources and that. And those art directors are of a different mindset more often than not than I am. They're more of the, you know, the structured, the you know, what's the word? Shepherds, if you will, you know, trying to get everybody kind of contained and aligned, as opposed to creative.
So it's
vision.
more of a structured way when it comes to
It was more,
IPs.
on those titles, the ADs functioned more as art managers than necessarily.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Daniel, for this discussion. I think I learned a lot. Definitely not there yet to be an art director, and probably will never be. But I'm very, very grateful. There's a lot of people that look up to you in what you have done and the cultures that you've built. And now there's artists working in a lot of different other companies and bringing that love and care to the products and to the workplaces that they contribute to. So I'm very, very grateful for you being with me today. And
well, thank you so much
for being an amazing art director.
Thank you so much. It was a great pleasure and a great opportunity. And before I leave, let me say one more time, this is my point of view. None of these principles I hold as, you know, the letter of the law, or this is how things are, or this is how things will always be, or not even things I will necessarily believe in 10 years down the road. It's how I feel at this point in my career, and it's for intended as a, you know, as a conversation starter or food for thought for people. And if they come to completely different conclusions, that's fine, as long as they do have their own opinion on their work.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Danielle. Thank you so much for this.
Hi, Daniel.
Hi, how are you? Can you see me?
Fine. Yes, I can see you and hear you well.
I lost the video of you. So anyway, it doesn't matter. It's good that you can both see me and hear me. So go ahead. Thank you for inviting me. I'm ready to start answering questions the best I can. I have no idea what to expect, but by all means, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks once again for coming. And yeah, we're all settled and fine, ready for the Q&A session. It's not going to be long, and we have just a couple of like simple questions from various chats on WinHub platform. So let's get to it. So the first one is, and sorry for the interruption, like quick reminder, guys in the audience, viewers, if you still have questions, please go post them on the lectures chat on WinHub. I will read them out loud. And to the questions. First one is, Daniel, how and where did you learn how to manage your artist team correctly, and how not to fall into criticizing and micromanagement? Did you like go to any courses, classes, or is it entirely coming from the experience?
First, I would start by saying that I don't believe there's such a thing as managing the right way or the wrong way. It's simply my way. I strongly believe that management style needs to be adjusted to the team culture and the configuration of your team. It depends a great deal to the kind of the composition of the team, the talent you have on board, the personality. So it's a matter of knowing your team members, your coworkers well, and using common sense to tailor your communication style to facilitate that connection as intimately as possible. No, I did not take any courses, nor do I believe much in courses that prescribe recipes for success. So again, it's a matter of trial and error and building experience over time.
Thank you. So yes, I guess communication is the key here, right? You have to be a great communicator to like deal well with your team and with your coworkers.
The key to communication being listening as much as you talk, or even more. So a great communicator doesn't mean a good eloquent speaker or just that, but also being a good listener and being open to that communication going both ways. It's not a matter of preaching, but rather of engaging in creative debate and allowing everybody else to kind of contribute to the conversation. So it's not a one-way street. That's the key to good communication.
Yeah, thank you. And the next question is, I guess, very interesting. the question is how to stay unique as an artist when you become an art director or a manager. Is that so that when you are interacting with so many colleagues day by day, you get so much influenced by their jobs that you can lose your own style? How to keep your own style?
As I was saying during that recorded interview with Ninel, style is only relevant if it is genuine, if it truly is a natural, organic expression of what you have to share. And so the key to being original is staying true to yourself and being honest and open, and not caring much about how do I project myself, or what kind of image do I project outwards, but rather to make sure that your art reflects your most intimate interior struggles and interests and such. So it shouldn't be fabricated with the scope of looking good to your fans or to the consumers or whatever, but rather it should be the result of a sincere burning desire to express emotions and to share ideas or emotions or a state of mind or a state of soul, for the matter, with everybody else. And so, we are all different and unique, as long as we are honest enough to accept that and to be ready to show ourselves in our truest colors. Then the uniqueness of our art and style are guaranteed.
Thank you. So I believe here being genuine and being unique and being yourself is the key to
and honest
and honesty. Yeah, for
honesty
sure.
Yeah.
So apart from this, what recommendations could you give, like from your own perspective and experience? What recommendations would you give to the people who would want to get involved, not only like into being an artist, but also into the art direction and working with other artists and managing them? What qualities should they develop, and like what kind of portfolio should they have, or such things?
Well, managing people in itself should never be one's goal. I mean, what kind of an ego would that take to want to manage for the sake of bossing people around? So management is only a route one should choose if it serves a higher, loftier goal of creating a higher, greater entertainment experience. Now, as far as skills it would take to get into an art director position, again, communication is huge. Being able to earn and build and sustain trust, that takes time and a great deal of honesty. Again, artists are a weird bunch. We artists tend to be somewhat skeptical of talkers, and we truly take to heart advice or direction when it comes from people who can prove hands-on that they can walk the walk, not just talk the talk. So in my opinion, it is important to prove with actual hands-on examples, leading by example, that you know what you're doing and what you're talking about, rather than engage in abstract, theoretical dissertations about what makes good art and such. They are not mutually exclusive. I mean, mastering or having a good command of the terminology and the art talk is important, but to truly buy credibility with your team, in my opinion, it is important to occasionally, just pick up your tools of choice and lead by example.
Thank you very much. And we have one more question, if you mind, and it's also about portfolio. So is preferred present and specific art style aiming a specific game project, or better something more generalistic to present to a potential partner, or the one who is ordering the art?
Again, it is preferable for your art style to be, how do I put this? To truly represent the talent and the capabilities and the sensibility of the people who put out that product, not necessarily to aim at pleasing a client, a publisher, or an investor. They are not your customers. Your target audience is the consumer. So what you want to truly understand is, and form a strong informed opinion, is the ultimate experience that you want your consumer to have. So it's reverse engineering from that emotion that you want to instill in your consumer, or state of mind, or thought process, and then kind of reverse engineer the style and everything, all the means that you choose, all the decisions you make, all the forks in the road you take, should be aimed at taking you closer to achieving that end goal, rather than thinking short term and just trying to please the person who you are making a presentation to in the short run to get funding for the next milestone. It is important to educate them, if needed, on the value of thinking long term and thinking with the consumer in mind, and working backwards from there.
All right, thank you very much. And I would say we have one finishing question. So I've heard that some artists find it difficult to find inspiration day by day to proceed with their everyday's job. How do you find inspiration, and where would you recommend to look for it?
Oh my goodness, how much time do you have? I can talk about this. It's a subject that's really dear to me.
We have time, no worries.
Inspiration or subjects worth triggering emotions are everywhere around us. It's just a matter of learning to see and learning to resonate to the world around us. And that leads me to something I keep saying and repeating over and over. It's about learning to stay open emotionally and vulnerable and receptive to the inputs from the other world, the outer world. It's not something you can flip a switch on overnight. It's something you learn over time to start looking around and appreciating beauty and appreciating ugliness and appreciate everything that surrounds you, be it nature, be it the human condition, or social interactions, or you name it. But there's hardly anything around us that is not worth reacting or giving thought to, or reacting emotionally, if you are open to it. So being vulnerable is another way of saying, being open and having all the pores of your being, so to speak, open and receptive to inputs from the outer world. That's, so if you can get yourself in that mind, state of mind, and function in that mode, day in, day out, there's just so much out there worth responding to. I keep telling my artists, make sure that you cry at least once a day, and it doesn't mean that it should be a kind of a frivolous, gratuitous, artificial exercise in acting. No, there's plenty around us, if you learn to see things, worth responding emotionally to with a level of intensity that equates to tearing up. It drives me nuts when I see people walking around with their eyes on their iPhone, on social media, or going on a road trip, and rather than looking out the window, being glued to their Facebook page or whatever, or visiting great cities or great natural landmarks, and rather than looking around and absorbing it all, just living or looking within themselves, or looking inwards rather than outwards, and missing out on all these stimuli that are everywhere and worth tapping into. So it's not a matter, inspiration is not hard to find. It's not rare sources of inspiration. I mean, it's a matter of being trained to respond, being made of, so to speak, comparing it to a musical instrument. There's a certain wood that you build violins out of, right? Because it resonates, and you can't make a violin out of clay or out of styrofoam, right? It just simply doesn't respond to the vibrations, around it. So getting your whole being into a state that is receptive to these inputs and willing to resonate and respond is the key to finding inspiration, in my opinion. Or at least that's how I function. Again, everything I ever say should be taken with a grain of salt. It's not the one and only recipe to being an artist, it's the way my mind functions. It's the reason why I don't like doing workshops, because it's just too personal. And if people just try to emulate purely somebody's style or technique, there's no value in that, unless you truly can get yourself to understand the thinking process or the emotional journey that an artist goes through in the creative process. Otherwise, it's just staying at the surface.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Ninel, for this such like the full, and I believe you could also describe this topic about inspiration, especially for like a way broader. And I would be great actually to like reconnect later for maybe some other tones and games activities. And thank you very much for coming to this short questions and answers session.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's my pleasure. I love talking to artists who are truly interested, and by all means, yeah, contact me, and we'll make sure to create a more permanent connection, and find ways to collaborate in the future.
Thank you, and goodbye and take care.